James Callahan had built an empire from nothing. The towering glass walls of Callahan Tech stood as a testament to his relentless ambition, his ability to outthink, outmaneuver, and outwork every competitor in his field. From the outside, his life looked like a dream. The private jets, the penthouse overlooking Boston, the name that commanded respect in every boardroom. But standing in Mount Auburn Cemetery, surrounded by the scent of damp earth and dying flowers, he felt none of it mattered. The funeral had ended hours ago, yet James remained, rooted to the spot in front of Claire Donovan's grave. Beloved mother, artist, and dreamer. The words carved into the marble twisted like a knife in his gut. No mention of being a wife. No connection to him. Just a life she had lived without him. A sharp wind cut through the trees, but James barely registered the cold. He had faced hostile negotiations, market crashes, betrayals from those he once trusted, but nothing prepared him for the hollow ache inside him now. He had thought foolishly that the past was behind him, that Claire had moved on, just as he had told himself he had. But here she was, gone. And here he was, too late for anything but regrets. He clenched his fists, his perfectly tailored coat doing nothing to shield him from the chill creeping up his spine. They had met a decade ago, back when he was still clawing his way to the top. She had been fire, passionate, full of dreams that didn't involve stock options or quarterly earnings. He had loved that about her. And yet, it was that very fire he had extinguished, drowning her in his late nights, his broken promises, his belief that success would be enough for both of them. She had finally walked away 5 years ago, leaving nothing but a note on their bed. I loved you, but I couldn't wait forever. He never tried to bring her back, not because he didn't love her, but because he believed he had already lost her. And now, he knew he had. A muffled sob broke the silence. James stiffened. He wasn't alone. A few rows away, near Claire's grave, stood 2 small figures. Boys, no older than 7 or 8. Their tiny shoulders trembled as they clutched each other, their heads bowed. Something inside James shifted, an unfamiliar sensation coiling in his chest. He took a step forward, his Italian leather shoes crunching softly against the gravel. The taller of the 2 sniffled loudly and placed a single white flower on the grave. "Mom, we miss you," he whispered, his voice barely audible in the wind. James stopped breathing. "Mom?" His gaze darted between the gravestone and the children, his mind racing. Their delicate features, their dark hair, their sharp cheekbones. They were too familiar. Too much like his own reflection staring back at him in the mirror each morning. His heart pounded as realization slammed into him like a freight train. Claire had been pregnant when she left, and she never told him. His knees threatened to buckle, his breath turning shallow. The world blurred at the edges, his carefully controlled existence fracturing in an instant. The boys didn't notice him at first, too lost in their sorrow. Then, as if sensing his presence, the younger one glanced up. His eyes, James's own eyes staring back at him, widened with fear. He grabbed his brother's hand. "Who are you?" the older boy asked, his voice cautious yet firm. James opened his mouth, but no words came. How could he explain? How could he tell them that the man they had never met, the man who had unknowingly abandoned them, was standing before them now? His voice cracked. He swallowed hard and tried again. "I knew your mother." The boys exchanged glances, their expressions shifting from fear to curiosity. The younger one wiped his nose on his sleeve. "Are you Mommy's friend?" he asked, his voice filled with innocence that shattered James's already fragile composure. He wanted to say yes. He wanted to tell them that he had loved their mother more than anything, that he had once dreamed of a future with her. that if he had known about them, nothing in the world would have kept him away. But the words got stuck in his throat. Instead, he nodded slowly. The older boy narrowed his eyes. "Then why weren't you at the funeral?" James swallowed hard. He had been at the funeral, standing in the back, watching from a distance, feeling like a stranger at the burial of the only woman he had ever loved. He hadn't belonged among those who had truly known her in the end. Before he could respond, hurried footsteps approached. An elderly woman, small but commanding, with a protective energy that immediately told James she knew exactly who he was, rushed forward and placed her hands on the boy's shoulders. "Noah, Liam," she said firmly. "What did I tell you about talking to strangers?" James's head snapped up at the names. Noah, Liam. His chest tightened. His sons. The woman's eyes met his, and in that instant, recognition flickered across her face. Then her expression hardened. "You need to leave." Her voice was steel, brokering no argument. James clenched his jaw. He had spent his entire life negotiating billion-dollar deals, bending powerful men to his will. But in this moment, he felt utterly powerless. The boys didn't move away, still watching him, still curious. "I just want to—" "No," the woman cut him off. "You had your chance." Then she turned and led the boys away, their small hands gripping her coat. James stood there, frozen, as his children disappeared through the rusted iron gates of the cemetery. His children. He had children. James Callahan had spent his life chasing success, believing he had everything he could ever want. But in a single moment he realized how much he had lost, and for the first time in years, he had no idea what to do next. James Callahan had faced market crashes, corporate betrayals, and billion-dollar lawsuits, but nothing had ever left him as shaken as the sight of those boys disappearing through the cemetery gates. His mind refused to accept what his heart already knew. They were his children. He stood there for what felt like hours, his body frozen, his thoughts an uncontrolled storm. The wind howled through the leafless trees, but he barely noticed. Claire had been pregnant when she left, and she never told him. The realization hit like a sucker punch. Had she kept them from him on purpose? Had she feared he wouldn't want them? Or had she simply assumed he was too consumed by his business to care? A sharp gust of wind made him shiver, snapping him back to reality. He couldn't stand here, drowning in regret. He had to act. His jaw tightened as he strode toward his car, gripping his keys like they were a lifeline. He slid into the driver's seat of his black Bentley and stared at his own reflection in the rearview mirror. His usual composed, ruthless expression was gone. In its place was something foreign, something raw. For the first time in years, he didn't feel in control. James barely remembered the drive back to his penthouse in downtown Boston. The skyline was a blur of lights as he pulled into the underground garage and stepped into the private elevator leading to the top floor. The moment he walked into his penthouse, he loosened his tie and poured himself a drink. The aged scotch burned his throat, but it did nothing to quiet the storm inside him. "Find out everything about Claire Donovan's life after she left me." His voice was sharp, commanding, as he spoke into his phone. Lauren, his assistant, didn't miss a beat. "Of course, sir. Any specifics?" "Yes. Where she lived, who she was with, and most importantly," he hesitated, his grip tightening around the glass, "her children." There was a beat of silence on the other end before Lauren's voice softened slightly. "I'll get on it right away." James ended the call and exhaled slowly. His assistant had worked for him long enough to know when to ask questions and when to keep quiet. He appreciated that now more than ever. As he looked out over the city, the weight of what he had lost pressed against him. 7 years. 7 years of birthdays, scraped knees, bedtime stories, memories he had missed, moments he would never get back. And the worst part? His sons didn't even know who he was. By morning, Lauren had results. She placed a thick folder on his desk, and James opened it with shaking hands. Claire had moved to Cambridge 6 years ago, just months after she walked out of their shared Manhattan apartment. There was no record of her remarrying, no sign of another man in her life. She had been raising their sons alone. James scanned the records of her last few years. She had been living modestly, working as a freelance artist. She had sold paintings at local galleries, enough to get by but never enough to be comfortable. And then, 4 months ago, came the part that made his stomach turn, a diagnosis, stage 4 ovarian cancer. His grip tightened around the papers. She had been dying, and I never knew. James leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. The cold, detached part of his mind, the businessman in him, wondered why she hadn't reached out for help. But the man in him, the one who had once loved Claire with everything he had, knew the answer. She had been too proud, too determined to do it on her own. And maybe she had been too hurt to ever let him back in. His hands trembled as he turned the page, revealing the name of the woman who had taken in his children after Claire's death, Evelyn Carter. James arrived at Evelyn's house that afternoon. The modest home in Cambridge was a stark contrast to the luxury he was used to, but that didn't matter now. He knocked twice, his pulse hammering. When the door opened, Evelyn stood before him, arms crossed, her expression as hard as stone. "I was expecting you," she said. James frowned. "You were?" She nodded, her eyes sharp. "I figured it wouldn't take long before the great James Callahan decided to step in now that it's convenient." Her words cut deep, but James held his ground. "I didn't know." Evelyn's jaw tightened. "And whose fault is that?" Silence stretched between them before she exhaled, stepping onto the porch and pulling the door closed behind her. "You have a lot of nerve coming here," she said, her voice lower now. "Do you think you can just swoop in and claim them like some acquisition? Life doesn't work that way, Callahan." "I don't want to claim them. I want to know them." His voice was quiet, but there was a desperation beneath it that he couldn't hide. Evelyn studied him for a long moment, and then she shook her head. "You don't get to just walk into their lives. They don't even know who you are. Do you have any idea how much Claire shielded them from you?" His stomach twisted. "Why?" "Because she didn't think you'd care." The words were a punch to the gut. James had spent his life proving himself to the world, building an empire, securing his legacy. But the one person who had mattered most had believed he wouldn't care about his own children. Evelyn must have seen something shift in his expression because her own hardened stance softened just slightly. "The boys are grieving, James. They just lost their mother. The last thing they need is a stranger throwing their world into chaos. I'm not a stranger. You are to them." The truth of it stung. He had thought discovering them would be the hardest part. But this, facing the reality of what they had lost, was far worse. Evelyn exhaled, rubbing a hand over her forehead. "Look, I'm not heartless, but I need to think about what's best for them. And right now, I don't think that's you." James clenched his jaw. "What if you're wrong?" She met his gaze without flinching. "What if I'm not?" They stared at each other for a long moment, a silent battle of wills. Then finally, Evelyn sighed. "They go to Millennium Park every Saturday afternoon. If you really want to see them, be there. But you don't introduce yourself as their father. You don't push them. You let them decide if they want you in their lives." James swallowed hard. It wasn't the answer he wanted, but it was a start. As he turned to leave, Evelyn's voice stopped him one last time. "For what it's worth, Claire never stopped loving you. She just stopped waiting for you to love her back." James didn't respond, because for the first time in his life he had no idea what to say. James Callahan had never been a man who waited for opportunities to come to him. He took them. He had built an empire from nothing, negotiated ruthless deals, and outmaneuvered some of the most powerful players in the industry. But for the first time in his life, he was being told to wait, and he hated it. Sitting in his office at Callahan Tech, he drummed his fingers against the polished mahogany desk, staring at the information Lauren had gathered. The file on Claire's life after she left him was detailed, yet it wasn't enough. He needed more. He needed to understand why she had kept his sons from him, why she had chosen to struggle alone instead of reaching out. His penthouse had never felt so empty. The usual distractions, endless calls, meetings, reports, felt meaningless now. For years he had told himself he had everything he needed, but now he realized he had nothing of real worth. He picked up his phone and dialed. "Lauren, I need you to find out everything you can on Evelyn Carter. I want to know what kind of woman has been raising my children." Lauren, always efficient, replied without hesitation. "I'll send over what I find within the hour." James exhaled sharply and leaned back in his chair. The anticipation clawed at him. He wasn't used to feeling powerless. But this wasn't a business deal. This was family. An hour later, Lauren walked in and placed a file on his desk. Evelyn Carter, age 64, retired school teacher, lived in Cambridge her entire life. No children of her own, but she was Claire's closest friend and, from what I can gather, like a second mother to the boys. James flipped through the file, scanning over the details. A former English teacher, widowed young, spent most of her life helping disadvantaged kids. She wasn't just some bitter old woman standing between him and his sons. She was a woman who had given them the stability he had failed to provide. That didn't make this easier. "She's also incredibly protective," Lauren added. "If you want her trust, you're going to have to earn it." James closed the folder and sighed. "She told me they go to Millennium Park every Saturday." Lauren hesitated. "And what exactly is your plan?" His jaw tightened. "I don't know yet." And that was the truth. James Callahan always had a plan, always had a strategy. But this time he had no roadmap, no precedent, no deal to broker. This was different. This was real. Saturday arrived sooner than he was ready for, dressed in jeans and a sweater, an unusual sight for a man usually in tailored suits. He arrived at Millennium Park early. He stood near the Cloud Gate sculpture, hands in his pockets, scanning the crowd. Families laughed, couples strolled, children ran ahead of their parents. He watched it all, wondering how different his life would have been if Claire had stayed, if he had given her a reason to. Then he saw them. Noah and Liam were running across the grass, a soccer ball between them. They were laughing, completely oblivious to the weight of the moment. James's chest tightened. They should have been laughing with me. Evelyn sat on a nearby bench, watching them with careful eyes. She spotted him almost immediately, and her expression hardened. But she didn't tell him to leave. That was something. He took a deep breath and stepped forward. The moment the ball rolled toward him, James acted on instinct. He trapped it with his foot, then nudged it gently toward Liam, who ran up to grab it. "Nice kick," James said, forcing his voice to stay casual. Liam grinned. "Thanks. Noah's better, though. He plays at school." Noah, who had been a few steps behind, stopped in his tracks. His dark eyes narrowed, assessing James with quiet suspicion. James swallowed hard. He could see Claire in him, the intensity, the guarded nature. "Soccer, huh?" he said, directing his words toward Noah. "I bet you've got a strong kick." Noah shrugged. "It's okay." Liam, however, was more enthusiastic. "Want to play with us?" James hesitated. His eyes flickered to Evelyn, who was watching carefully. When she gave the smallest nod, he exhaled and smiled. Sure. For the next 20 minutes, James did something he hadn't done in years. He played. He let himself enjoy the sound of their laughter, the thrill of competition, the way Liam cheered when he scored a goal, the way Noah, despite his resistance, started to take the game seriously. He watched them move, memorizing every expression, every mannerism. These were his sons, his sons. When they finally collapsed on the grass, catching their breath, Liam grinned at him. "You're pretty good." James chuckled. "I try." Noah, however, was still watching him warily. "Why are you here?" James felt the weight of the question. He had to be careful. "I just wanted to meet you." Liam, still too young to see the complexity in the moment, nodded happily. "I like you." James's chest tightened. He wanted to hold on to those words. But Noah wasn't convinced. Before James could respond, Evelyn approached. "Boys, it's time to go." Liam groaned. "Already?" Noah, however, stood quickly, as if eager to put distance between them. James knew this was the moment he had to let go. He couldn't push. "It was nice meeting you," he said evenly. Liam beamed. "Will you come again?" Evelyn tensed, but she didn't interrupt. James looked at her, silently asking for permission. After a long pause, she sighed. "We'll be here next week." James swallowed the lump in his throat and nodded. "Then I'll see you next week." Noah didn't say anything as he walked away, but he glanced back once before they disappeared into the crowd. James stood there for a long time, watching them go. He had expected rejection, maybe even hostility. What he hadn't expected was this: hope. James Callahan was not a patient man. He had built a billion-dollar empire by making quick, calculated decisions. He didn't wait for opportunities. He created them. But as he sat in his penthouse, staring at the city lights stretching beyond the glass walls, he realized he had no blueprint for this, no strategy to win the trust of his own children. Liam had accepted him easily, but Noah was another story. He could see the skepticism in the boy's eyes, the way he held himself back. "Why are you here?" Noah had asked him that question at the park, and James still didn't have an answer that felt good enough. He took a deep breath and glanced at his watch. Millennium Park. Saturday. Evelyn had given him that much. Now he had to prove himself worthy of more. The next afternoon, James pulled up outside Evelyn Carter's modest home in Cambridge. It was a quiet, tree-lined street, far removed from the world of wealth and power he was used to. He stepped out of his Bentley and adjusted the cuffs of his sweater, feeling strangely out of place. He had no idea how this conversation would go, but he knew one thing: he wasn't leaving without answers. James knocked twice, the sound echoing through the stillness. A few moments later, the door opened, and Evelyn stood before him, her expression unreadable. She didn't look surprised to see him. "I figured you'd come knocking sooner or later," she said, crossing her arms. "You don't seem like the type to walk away." James met her gaze evenly. "I'm not." Evelyn studied him for a moment before sighing. "Fine. You might as well come in." The inside of her home was warm and inviting, filled with books, family photos, and the comforting scent of something baking in the oven. It was nothing like his sleek, minimalist penthouse, and yet it felt safe. James followed her into the living room, his eyes immediately landing on a framed photo of Claire with the boys. She looked happy. Tired, but happy. A pang of regret shot through him. "She was a good mother," Evelyn said, watching him closely. "I don't doubt that," James replied quietly. Evelyn sat down across from him, folding her hands in her lap. "So, what exactly do you want, Callahan?" James exhaled. "The truth." Evelyn raised an eyebrow. "The truth?" I didn't know, he said, his voice edged with frustration. Claire never told me she was pregnant. She never reached out. If she had, He stopped himself. What? Would have been there? Would have dropped everything for her? Even he wasn't sure if that was true. Evelyn leaned back in her chair. And why do you think that is? James clenched his jaw. I don't know. She was proud, James, and she was hurt. You loved your company more than you loved her. Do you really think she wanted to call you and beg you to be a father? His chest tightened. He opened his mouth to argue, but Evelyn held up a hand. I'm not saying she was right to keep them from you, but I understand why she did. James looked away, his gaze landing on another photo, this one of Noah and Liam at a school event, both of them smiling. I can't change the past, he said after a moment, but I can be here now. Evelyn studied him for a long time before speaking. Liam's already attached to you. That boy loves with his whole heart. But Noah remembers more. He remembers how his mother struggled, how she worked late into the night just to make sure they had everything they needed. James swallowed hard. I would have helped, but you weren't there, Evelyn cut in. And that's what Noah sees, a man who wasn't there when it mattered. Her words hit him like a punch to the gut. What do I do? James asked, his voice quieter than before. Evelyn sighed, rubbing her temples. You keep showing up. You don't push too hard, and you don't make promises you can't keep. James nodded, absorbing every word. Then, after a pause, he asked, Why did you agree to let me see them? Evelyn's expression softened just a fraction. Because despite everything, Claire never wanted them to hate you. James' throat tightened. He hadn't expected that. I'll be at the park next Saturday, he said after a long moment, and every Saturday after that. Evelyn gave him a small nod. Then I guess we'll see what kind of man you really are, Callahan. As James walked back to his car, he felt something shift inside him. He had spent his entire life closing deals, winning battles, building a legacy. But for the first time, he realized he was fighting for something that actually mattered, his family. James Callahan wasn't used to waiting. He had spent his life taking charge, making decisions that shifted markets, sealing billion-dollar deals with a handshake. But now, as he stood on the edge of Millennium Park, hands shoved into his pockets, watching two small boys kick a soccer ball between them, he felt something unfamiliar. Nervousness. Evelyn had been true to her word. She sat on a bench nearby, her sharp eyes never straying far from the boys as they played. She hadn't acknowledged James since he arrived, but she also hadn't told him to leave. It was progress, however small. Liam's laughter rang through the air as he tried to steal the ball from his older brother. Noah was more focused, precise in his movements, clearly the more competitive of the two. James watched as Liam lunged clumsily, missed, and fell onto the grass with an exaggerated groan. Noah smirked. You have to be faster than that. Liam stuck out his tongue. I'll get you next time. James took a slow breath. Now or never. The moment the ball rolled in his direction, he moved instinctively. He stopped it with his foot and nudged it gently back toward them. Liam was the first to notice. His face lit up. Whoa! Nice kick, mister. James forced a small smile. Thanks. You guys play a lot? Yeah. Noah plays for school, Liam said eagerly. He's really good. Noah stepped forward, his brows furrowing as he studied James carefully. The suspicion in his young eyes was unmistakable. James met his gaze evenly. I bet you've got a strong kick. Noah hesitated, then shrugged. It's okay. Liam, unfazed by the tension, grinned. Want to play with us? James's throat tightened. He hadn't expected an invitation. His eyes flickered to Evelyn, who sat watching from the bench. She gave no reaction, but her lack of protest was enough of a signal. He nodded. Sure. For the next 20 minutes, James did something he hadn't done in years. He played. He let himself be drawn into their world, running across the grass, blocking shots, laughing as Liam tried to tackle him. Noah was more reserved, but James noticed the way he started to engage more, his movements becoming quicker, more competitive. He wanted to win. James could respect that. At one point, James blocked Noah's shot, sending the ball rolling to Liam, who gleefully kicked it into the makeshift goal. Liam whooped, running in circles. I scored! I scored! Noah groaned. That was a lucky shot, James chuckled. It was a good shot. Liam beamed. You're not bad, mister. James smiled. James. Noah stiffened. His expression darkened slightly. James felt the shift instantly. He had overstepped. Evelyn stood then, calling out, Boys, it's time to go. Liam groaned in protest, but Noah was already moving toward her, his guard back up. James hadn't realized how much he'd missed the warmth in Noah's face until it disappeared again. Liam hesitated, then turned back to James. Are you coming back next time? James swallowed hard. He looked at Evelyn, silently asking for permission. After a long pause, she sighed. We'll be here next week. James nodded. Then I'll see you next week. Noah didn't say anything as he walked away, but just before they disappeared into the crowd, he glanced back. It was quick. Barely a second. But James saw it. Hope. James Callahan had never been one to second-guess himself. In business, his instincts were sharp, his decisions swift. Yet, as he approached Millennium Park for the second week in a row, he found himself hesitating. Would Noah even want him here? Would Liam still be as welcoming? Or had the past week allowed doubt, and Evelyn's influence, to undo any progress he had made? The moment he spotted them, he knew he had made the right decision to come. Liam waved excitedly, immediately breaking into a sprint toward him. James, you came back. James smiled, crouching slightly to meet him as the boy skidded to a stop. Of course. I told you I would, didn't I? Liam grinned. Noah said you wouldn't. James looked past him and saw Noah standing a few yards away, arms crossed. Unlike last week, he wasn't scowling, but he wasn't smiling either. It was progress, albeit slight. Guess I proved him wrong, James said lightly. Liam nodded enthusiastically. You want to play? James glanced at Noah. Only if your brother says it's okay. Noah narrowed his eyes slightly, as if trying to gauge James's intentions. Then, with a slow sigh, he gave a small shrug. Whatever. Liam took that as a yes, and immediately dragged James toward the grass. The game was different this time. Last week, James had been an outsider joining in. Today, he was expected. Liam was as enthusiastic as ever, but Noah played harder, more competitive, determined to outmaneuver James. And James noticed something. Noah wanted to win against him. He wasn't just playing the game. He was challenging James, testing him. James let him. When Noah finally managed to score a goal against him, the boy's lips twitched, almost like he wanted to smile, but refused to give in to the impulse. You've got some skills, James admitted, wiping sweat from his forehead. Noah shrugged. I practice a lot, Liam chimed in. Mom used to practice with us before she got sick. The weight of those words settled heavily in James's chest. He forced himself to respond carefully. She must have been really good. Liam nodded enthusiastically. She said she wasn't as good as Noah, though. Noah's expression flickered, his guarded wall lowering for a split second before he masked it again. She always made sure we had fun. James swallowed hard, realizing this was the first time Noah had voluntarily shared something personal with him. He nodded. She was a special woman. Noah's grip on the soccer ball tightened. You knew her? The question cut deep. James could answer it 100 different ways, but none would be enough to undo the past. He settled for the truth. Yeah, I knew her. Noah didn't say anything, but James saw the way his jaw clenched slightly before he turned away. The conversation was over, but it had happened, and for now that was enough. After the game, they sat under the shade of a large tree, cooling off. Liam chatted easily, asking James about his favorite soccer teams, his favorite foods. James answered every question, committing every detail about his sons to memory. Noah remained quiet but listened. James caught him watching him a few times, his expression unreadable. Evelyn eventually called them over, signaling the end of their time together. Liam ran ahead, but Noah lingered. He looked at James, hesitating before asking, Are you coming next week? James felt a surge of emotion he hadn't expected. He kept his tone even. If you want me to. Noah shrugged. Liam does. James let a small smile tug at his lips. And what about you? Noah didn't answer, but as he turned to leave, James heard him mumble, I guess. It wasn't much, but it was something. And James Callahan had built empires with far less. James Callahan never let uncertainty slow him down. He had spent years making snap decisions that altered markets, closing deals that others called impossible. Yet, sitting in his penthouse late at night, staring out at the Boston skyline, he found himself hesitating. The past few weeks had been an exercise in patience. Every Saturday he showed up at Millennium Park, and every Saturday he inched forward, gaining ground with Liam, while Noah remained distant, watching, testing, waiting for James to fail. He wouldn't. But tonight his focus was split, because today something unexpected had happened. He had met Olivia Brooks. That afternoon James had arrived at the park as usual, prepared for another slow step forward. Liam ran up to greet him with his usual enthusiasm, while Noah hung back, his arms crossed as if reminding James that trust had not yet been earned. Before he could engage them, a woman's voice cut through the air. So you're the infamous James Callahan. James turned to see a striking woman in her late 30s approaching. She had warm brown eyes, auburn hair pulled into a loose ponytail, and an air of quiet strength. Her expression was unreadable, her arms crossed in a way that reminded him of Noah. I suppose that depends on who's asking, James replied smoothly. She smirked. Olivia Brooks, Claire's best friend. His stomach tightened. Claire had mentioned an Olivia before, years ago, but he had never met her. Now it seemed she knew everything about him. Before he could respond, Evelyn walked up, placing a hand on Olivia's shoulder. Olivia's been helping with the boys since Claire got sick, she explained. She's family. James nodded, measuring his words. Then I suppose I should thank you. Olivia raised an eyebrow. For what? For looking after them. Her lips pressed into a thin line. They're good kids. They didn't deserve to grow up without a father. James heard the accusation beneath her words, but he didn't flinch. He had faced worse in boardrooms. I didn't know about them. Olivia studied him for a moment before sighing. Yeah. That's the only reason I'm talking to you. As the afternoon went on, Olivia remained close, watching James like a hawk. Did Claire ever talk about me? He asked her quietly while Liam and Noah played. Olivia hesitated before answering. Not much. And when she did, it was never with anger, just sadness. James swallowed hard. Did she ever think about reaching out? Honestly? I think she wanted to. But she was afraid you'd be too busy, or worse, that you'd try to take the boys away. James frowned. I would never. Olivia held up a hand. I'm just telling you what she thought. Silence settled between them. James could feel Olivia's distrust, but there was something else too, a willingness to see if he was truly here for the right reasons. "I'm not leaving," James finally said. "Not this time." For the first time that day, Olivia's expression softened. Good. And just like that, James knew, winning over Olivia Brooks would be just as important as winning over Noah, because if she ever decided he wasn't worthy of being in the boys' lives, she wouldn't hesitate to shut him out. James Callahan had expected resistance, but he hadn't expected the past to claw at him so relentlessly. Each Saturday at Millennium Park, he felt like he was making progress, small, cautious steps into Liam and Noah's lives. Liam had embraced him quickly, eager to have someone to look up to. Noah, however, was still guarded, his trust locked behind a wall James couldn't quite scale. And then there was Olivia. If Evelyn was the gatekeeper, Olivia was the enforcer. She watched him like a hawk, always present, always evaluating. James understood her protectiveness. Claire had been her best friend. And yet something about Olivia intrigued him. She challenged him, kept him on edge. She saw through his carefully controlled exterior, forcing him to face truths he had long buried. But today, everything fell apart. James had planned something different this Saturday, a dinner. It was a simple invitation, nothing extravagant, just an opportunity to spend more time with the boys outside of the park. He had chosen a small Italian restaurant that, according to Lauren's research, Claire had often taken them to. It was a calculated move, a way to connect with them through shared memories. Liam had been thrilled, practically bouncing on his heels. Noah, as expected, was less enthusiastic. But when Evelyn had reluctantly agreed to let them go, James had felt hopeful. Maybe, just maybe, tonight would mark a turning point. Instead, it became a disaster. The restaurant was cozy, dimly lit with the rich aroma of garlic and fresh basil filling the air. James had arrived early, ensuring everything was perfect. When Evelyn, Olivia, and the boys walked in, he immediately noticed how tense Noah looked. Dinner started off well enough. Liam talked animatedly about school and soccer, while James listened attentively, genuinely interested in every detail. Evelyn remained neutral, while Olivia, to his surprise, seemed to be enjoying herself, engaging in light banter with him. Noah, however, barely touched his food. He pushed his pasta around on his plate, occasionally glancing at James before looking away again. It wasn't until the waitress came by, a woman in her 60s with a warm smile, that everything unraveled. "I remember your mother," she said kindly, placing a fresh basket of bread on the table. "She used to come here with you two all the time." Noah stiffened. "She loved the ravioli," the waitress continued. "Always made sure you boys had extra Parmesan." James smiled at the thought of Claire here, happy with their sons. But Noah wasn't smiling. "She had to work 2 jobs just to afford it," Noah muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. The table fell silent. James's stomach twisted. "Noah?" Noah's chair scraped against the floor as he stood abruptly. "You think one dinner makes up for everything?" His voice shook with anger, raw and unfiltered. "You weren't there. She needed you, and you were too busy being James Callahan to care." "Noah," Evelyn said softly, reaching for him, but he jerked away. James stood, trying to stay calm. "I didn't know she needed me. I didn't know about you." Noah let out a bitter laugh. "That's the problem. You never knew anything about her, did you?" James felt those words like a physical blow. "I don't want your fancy dinners," Noah continued, his voice cracking. "I don't want you." Without another word, he turned and stormed out of the restaurant. James hesitated for only a second before following him. Outside, the cool night air hit James as he spotted Noah pacing near the curb, his small hands clenched into fists. James approached cautiously, keeping his distance. "Noah," he said gently, "I know you're angry. You have every right to be." Noah whirled around, his face flushed with emotion. "You don't know anything about me." James exhaled. "Then tell me." Noah shook his head. "Why? So you can pretend to care?" James's chest ached at the accusation. "I do care." Noah's jaw tightened. "Then where were you?" James swallowed hard. He had no good answer. "I wish I had been there, more than anything." Noah's eyes glistened, but he quickly wiped at them, refusing to let James see him cry. "It's too late." James took a careful step closer. "I don't believe that, and I don't think you do either." For the first time, Noah didn't have a sharp response. He just looked at James, searching his face for something. Proof, sincerity, maybe even redemption. Before either of them could say anything else, Olivia stepped outside. She glanced between them, reading the tension immediately. "Noah, let's go home." Noah hesitated for a fraction of a second before walking past James, his shoulders hunched in defeat. James didn't stop him. As Olivia turned to follow, she paused. That was hard for him. James ran a hand down his face. "Yeah." She studied him for a moment. "He's scared, you know." James frowned. "Scared of what?" "Scared that if he lets you in, you'll leave, just like before." James' heart clenched. "I won't." Olivia nodded slowly. "Then prove it." And with that, she walked away, leaving James standing alone in the cold, wondering how many more times his son would walk away from him before he finally let him stay. James Callahan sat in his office, staring at his phone. It had been 3 days since the disastrous dinner, 3 days since Noah's words had cut through him like a blade. You weren't there. She needed you, and you were too busy being James Callahan to care. He had spent years building a name for himself, but to his own son that name meant nothing. For the first time in his life, he didn't know how to fix something. By the time Saturday arrived, James wasn't sure if showing up at Millennium Park was the right thing to do, but he had promised. And James Callahan didn't break promises, not anymore. He arrived early, taking a seat on a bench near the soccer field, waiting. When Evelyn and the boys arrived, Liam spotted him immediately and ran over, beaming. "You came," James forced a smile, ruffling Liam's hair. "Of course. I told you I would." Liam started talking animatedly about his week at school, his latest soccer game, and a science project he was excited about. But James's attention was drawn to Noah, who lagged behind, his gaze flickering toward James before looking away. James exhaled. "Hey, Noah." Noah didn't respond. Evelyn, standing nearby, crossed her arms. "He's still angry." James nodded. "I know." She studied him for a long moment. "You still coming next week?" James met her gaze. "Every week." Something in her expression shifted. Approval, maybe. Or at least acceptance. She gave a small nod before walking off, letting the boys play. James didn't push Noah to talk that afternoon. He let Liam pull him into another soccer match, knowing Noah was watching. He didn't try to force a connection. He simply showed up. It wasn't much, but it was all he could do. And then something unexpected happened. As the game ended, Liam ran off to grab a snack, leaving James sitting on the grass. He glanced over and found Noah standing a few feet away, shifting on his feet, as if debating something. Finally, Noah spoke, his voice quieter than usual. "You keep coming back." James nodded. "Yeah." Noah looked at him, skepticism flickering in his eyes. "Why?" James met his gaze. "Because I want to be here." Noah's lips pressed into a thin line. "Even when I don't want you to be?" James exhaled. "Even then." Noah studied him, as if waiting for the lie, waiting for the excuse. But James didn't offer one. For the first time, Noah didn't walk away. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was a start. James had spent years perfecting the art of patience in business. Negotiations took time. Deals required delicate maneuvering. But nothing in his career had tested his patience like trying to win over his son. Weeks had passed since the disastrous dinner, and while Noah hadn't warmed to him, he also hadn't pushed him away as aggressively. James knew better than to assume that meant he had forgiven him, but it was something, a fragile thread of progress, until it all unraveled in the worst way possible. James arrived at Millennium Park on Saturday, as he had every week since first meeting the boys. He spotted Liam first, laughing as he kicked a ball toward Noah. Noah, as usual, was more reserved, though James had noticed subtle changes. His stance wasn't as closed off, and he occasionally listened when James spoke. Small wins. Evelyn sat on her usual bench, watching them with careful eyes. Olivia was beside her today, sipping coffee, her expression unreadable as James approached. "You're early," Olivia remarked. James smirked. "That's a first." Evelyn shook her head. "We'll see if it's a good thing." Before James could respond, he noticed a man approaching from the side of the field, mid-40s, casually dressed, with a confident gait that suggested familiarity. Noah's face lit up. "Uncle David," Noah called, running toward him. James felt his stomach tighten. He had no idea who this man was. Liam followed, hugging the stranger who ruffled their hair with an easy familiarity. "Hey guys, you keeping up with your soccer skills?" "Yeah," Liam grinned. "I scored last week." James turned to Evelyn. "Who is that?" Evelyn sighed. "David Carter, my nephew." James's expression darkened. "And what exactly is his role in their lives?" Olivia interjected before Evelyn could answer. "David was around a lot when Claire was sick. Helped out when she needed it." James watched as David crouched to talk to Noah, a natural ease between them. Something inside him twisted. Had this man been a father figure to his boys when he wasn't there? Then the moment turned worse. David's eyes lifted and landed on James. His entire demeanor shifted. "This him?" he asked Noah. Noah nodded. "Yeah." David straightened, stepping toward James with an expression that immediately put James on edge. James Callahan. His tone was laced with something close to disdain. James extended a hand, forcing civility. "David." David ignored the gesture. "So you finally decided to show up." James tensed, but before he could respond, David turned back to Noah. "And you're okay with this guy hanging around?" Noah hesitated. It was a split second, but it was enough. James's jaw clenched. "I don't know what you've been told, but I—" David scoffed. "What you? You weren't here, Callahan. Claire raised those boys alone, and when she needed help, I was there. Not you." Noah's fists clenched at his sides. "Mom didn't need him," he muttered under his breath. James inhaled sharply. "Noah." But Noah had already taken a step back, his face contorted in frustration. "He's right," he snapped. "You weren't here. And now you think just showing up makes up for it?" James stared at his son, feeling the weight of every mistake he had ever made. "I know it doesn't." David let out a hollow laugh. "Well, at least you're not completely clueless." James fought to keep his emotions in check. "I didn't know about them." David's eyes flashed. "And whose fault is that?" James's patience snapped. "Claire made that choice for me. I never had the chance to be their father." Noah's face was unreadable now, his emotions warring beneath the surface. James took a slow breath, forcing himself to steady his voice. "But I am their father, and whether you like it or not, I'm here now." David let out a dry chuckle, shaking his head. "We'll see how long that lasts." And just like that, the damage was done. James watched as Noah turned on his heel and walked away, his shoulders tense, his walls reinforced once more. James had spent his life fighting for what he wanted, but he had never fought for something like this. And for the first time, he wasn't sure if he would win. James Callahan had never been a man who backed down from a fight. He had built an empire by standing his ground, by being relentless in the pursuit of what he wanted. But this fight, this battle for Noah's trust, was unlike anything he had ever faced. And for the first time in his life, he didn't know if he was winning or losing. Noah had barely spoken to him since their confrontation with David. The progress James had painstakingly made over the past few weeks had crumbled in an instant, reduced to nothing by a man who had been there when James wasn't. That thought alone gnawed at him. David had been there. James told himself it wasn't about competition, that this wasn't a business deal where he had to outmaneuver his rival. But deep down, the realization that another man had been a father figure to his children made him restless. He didn't want to resent David, but how could he not? The man had the trust of his son, something James was still grasping for, and now Noah had shut him out completely. It was Olivia who found him first. She showed up at his office unannounced, walking past his assistant with the confidence of someone who wouldn't take no for an answer. James glanced up from his desk as she strode in, arms crossed, expression unreadable. "Busy?" she asked. James leaned back in his chair, sighing. "Depends. Are you here to tell me how badly I screwed up?" She sat across from him, tilting her head slightly. "You want honesty?" "Always." She sighed. It wasn't just David's words that pushed Noah away. It was you. James frowned. "Me?" "You reacted like a man under attack. Noah saw that, and all it did was prove what he's already afraid of, that you care more about your pride than you do about fixing this." James exhaled sharply, rubbing a hand over his face. He hated that she was right. He had spent so much time trying to prove he belonged in his sons' lives that he hadn't stopped to think about what they actually needed from him. "I don't know what to do," he admitted. Olivia studied him for a long moment before leaning forward. "Prove to him that you're staying, not just in words but in actions." James shook his head. "I have been." "No, James." Olivia's voice softened, but her eyes held firm. "You've been showing up. That's different from staying." James let her words sink in, and for the first time, he understood. That night he drove to Noah and Liam's school. He had spent the entire afternoon making arrangements, pulling strings and ensuring everything was set. He had no idea if this would work, but he had to try. As the final school bell rang, children flooded out of the building, parents waiting to pick them up. James spotted Evelyn first, standing near the entrance, her sharp gaze locking onto him immediately. Liam saw him next. "James!" he yelled, waving excitedly. But James' focus was on Noah. Noah stopped in his tracks when he saw him. His expression hardened instantly, as if bracing for a confrontation. James held up a hand. "I just want to talk." Noah hesitated, but Evelyn gave him a small nod. He sighed and walked over, his backpack slung over one shoulder. "What?" James took a breath. "I know I can't change the past, and I know I messed up at the restaurant." Noah crossed his arms. "Yeah, you did." James nodded. "I let my pride get in the way. That's not an excuse, it's just the truth." Noah didn't reply, but he was listening. "I'm not here to erase David. I'm not here to pretend that the past 7 years didn't happen. But I am here, and I'm not leaving, Noah." Noah's expression flickered, something between disbelief and cautious hope. "That's what you say now." James reached into his pocket and pulled out 2 tickets, handing them to Noah. "This Saturday, Boston United game. Box seats." Noah stared at the tickets but didn't take them. "So what?" "So I want to take you. Just you and me." Noah's brow furrowed. "Why?" James's voice was steady. "Because I want to know you. Not just as Liam's brother, not just as Claire's son, but as my son." Noah's fingers twitched at his sides, his mask cracking ever so slightly. For the first time, James saw something different in his eyes. Not just anger or resentment, but uncertainty. And beneath that, maybe even a little hope. Finally, Noah reached out and took the tickets. "I haven't decided yet," he muttered. James gave him a small smile. "That's fair." And for the first time, Noah didn't walk away. James Callahan sat in his penthouse, staring at the untouched glass of whiskey on the table beside him. He had spent years using work, wealth, and success as shields against emotions he didn't want to feel. But tonight, none of that worked. Because tomorrow, Noah might show up. Or he might not. The uncertainty gnawed at him. He had never left things to chance before. In business, he strategized, manipulated, and controlled every variable. But this was something he couldn't control. Noah had the power now. And all James could do was wait. Saturday came with a crisp autumn breeze. The stadium loomed ahead, its towering lights bright even in the afternoon sun. James stood by the entrance, box seat tickets in hand, heart pounding harder than he cared to admit. He told himself he wasn't nervous, that if Noah didn't come, it wouldn't break him. Then at exactly 1:58 p.m., 2 minutes before kickoff, he saw him. Noah. The boy approached slowly, hands stuffed into the pockets of his hoodie, his expression carefully blank. He didn't look happy, but he was here. James forced himself to stay casual. "You made it." Noah shrugged. Didn't want to waste the ticket. James almost laughed at the stubbornness, so much like Claire's. Instead, he nodded and handed over the pass. "Fair enough. Let's get inside." The box seats were luxurious, with cushioned chairs and a perfect view of the field. James had arranged for food, pizza, soda, the works. He wasn't sure if Noah would eat anything, but he wanted to make the experience as comfortable as possible. They sat in silence for a while, watching as the players warmed up. James resisted the urge to force conversation, letting Noah set the pace. Eventually Noah spoke. "Did you ever play?" James blinked, caught off guard. "Soccer?" Noah nodded, still watching the field. James hesitated, then smiled slightly. "Not really. I played basketball in high school." Noah snorted. "Figures." James raised an eyebrow. "What's that supposed to mean?" Noah finally looked at him, his lips twitching as if suppressing a smile. "You're tall and old." James let out a laugh. "Wow, brutal honesty. I respect it." Noah smirked just a little before turning back to the game. The ice had cracked just a bit. As the game went on, they started talking. Small things at first. James asked about Noah's team at school, his favorite player. Noah answered but kept his responses short. Still, it was progress. Then, during halftime, James made a quiet confession. "I wanted to be here, Noah. If I had known about you and Liam, I swear I would have been." Noah didn't respond right away. When he did, his voice was quiet. "I don't know if I believe that." James exhaled, his throat tight. "I get it. But I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere." Noah didn't say anything. But for the first time, he didn't argue. James Callahan had never been one to celebrate small victories. In his world, you either won or you lost. There was no middle ground. But as he sat next to Noah in the stadium, watching the final minutes of the game tick down, he realized that sometimes progress was measured in moments rather than milestones. And today, he had been given a moment. Noah was here. He had stayed. He had listened. That was enough. The walk to the parking lot was quiet, but not uncomfortable. James kept his pace slow, letting Noah take the lead. He had learned that pushing only made the boy retreat, so instead, he let the silence settle between them like a tentative bridge. When they reached the car, James opened the passenger door for him. Noah hesitated for only a second before getting in. Another small victory. James started the engine, the low hum filling the space between them. "Hungry?" Noah shrugged. "I guess." James smirked. "That's as close to a yes as I'm gonna get, huh?" Noah shot him a sidelong glance. "Pretty much." James chuckled and pulled onto the road. "All right then. Burgers or pizza?" Noah leaned back in his seat, considering. "Burgers, but not the fancy kind." James raised an eyebrow. "So no five-star restaurant with truffle fries?" Noah made a face. "That sounds disgusting." James laughed. "Noted. Greasy diner burgers it is." They ended up at a small hole-in-the-wall diner just outside the city, the kind with cracked leather booths and a jukebox that still played classic rock. They slid into a booth and James watched as Noah picked up the menu, scanning it with practiced ease. He had to remind himself that this was normal for Noah. He wasn't a kid who had grown up in luxury. He had grown up in places like this with meals that didn't come from personal chefs. When the waitress came by, Noah ordered without hesitation. Double bacon cheeseburger, fries, and a vanilla milkshake. James raised an eyebrow but didn't comment. He ordered the same. As they waited for their food, James decided to take a risk. "So what do you do for fun?" Noah shrugged. "Play soccer, watch movies." "Anything else?" Noah hesitated. Then, almost reluctantly, he said, "I like to draw." James's eyebrows lifted in genuine surprise. "Really?" Noah nodded but kept his eyes on the table. "Mom taught me." James's chest tightened. He could picture it. Claire sitting with Noah, guiding his hand across the paper, her voice soft with encouragement. He had missed so much. "What do you like to draw?" James asked, keeping his tone light. Noah glanced at him as if debating whether to answer. Finally he said, "People." "Faces." James smiled. "That's impressive. Portraits are tough." Noah looked away but didn't deny it. "Mom was really good." James nodded. "She was." A beat of silence passed before Noah spoke again. "She had a sketchbook. She used to draw pictures of me and Liam when we were little." James swallowed hard. "Do you still have it?" Noah's fingers curled around the edge of the table. "Yeah." James hesitated, then said softly, "I'd love to see it sometime." Noah didn't respond right away, but he didn't say no either. The food arrived, and conversation turned to lighter topics. School, soccer, a ridiculous YouTube video Liam had shown him. James listened, committing every detail to memory. By the time they left the diner, the tension between them had eased into something that felt almost natural. As they pulled up to Evelyn's house, James parked but didn't turn off the engine. He looked over at Noah, who was staring out the window. "Noah," he said carefully. Noah didn't look at him. "Yeah?" James exhaled. "Thank you for today." Noah finally turned, his expression unreadable. "Why?" "Because it meant something to me." Noah studied him for a long moment before finally nodding. "Yeah, okay." It wasn't a grand declaration. It wasn't a promise of forgiveness. But it was enough. For now. The weeks that followed were different. For the first time since Claire's funeral, James didn't feel like an outsider in his son's lives. It was subtle at first. Noah sitting a little closer, not stiffening when James offered a ride, occasionally responding to texts with something more than one word. But to James, every little shift mattered. And Liam. Liam was all in. He would drag James into school projects, beg for soccer practice, and demand pancakes every Saturday morning. James had learned how to make them, a fact that both delighted Liam and horrified his personal chef. He'd started carving out real time, too, rescheduling meetings, delegating more. His CEO duties still loomed, but they no longer ruled him. For the first time in over a decade, James Callahan's life wasn't all about business. It was about family. One Wednesday evening, he picked the boys up from school. Liam talked nonstop about an upcoming science fair, but Noah sat quietly in the back, sketch pad in his lap, pencil moving methodically. James peeked in the rearview mirror. "What are you working on?" he asked. Noah hesitated. "Portrait. Of someone you know?" Noah shrugged. "Sort of." James didn't push. When they got home, Noah surprised him by leaving the sketch pad on the kitchen counter. James didn't open it. He waited. Later that night, when he walked past the living room, he saw Noah watching him from the hallway. "You can look," the boy muttered. James opened the sketch pad slowly. The portrait inside was striking. His own face stared back at him, older, tired, but undeniably him. It wasn't flattering, it wasn't softened, but it was real. "It's amazing," James said, meaning every word. Noah gave a small nod, almost embarrassed. "I wanted to see if I could draw you the way Mom would have." James swallowed hard. "You did." Evelyn remained cautious, but she no longer stood between James and the boys. One evening, after dinner, she pulled him aside while the kids were in the other room. "They trust slowly," she said, "but when they do, it's for life. Don't waste it." James nodded. "I don't intend to." And Olivia, she was still a quiet presence, but her once permanent skepticism had softened into something more watchful than wary. They had coffee a few times while waiting on the boys. Once, after a long silence, she said, "Claire would have wanted them to know you." James looked at her, surprised. "I didn't say she would have forgiven you," Olivia added, "but she would have wanted them to have their father." James could only nod, gratitude tightening his chest. It was Noah, ultimately, who made the next move. One chilly afternoon, as they sat outside sipping hot chocolate, Noah glanced up at James and asked, "Do you miss her?" James blinked. "Claire?" Noah nodded. James looked down at his drink. "Every day." Noah was quiet a moment. "I used to be mad that you weren't there. But now I think maybe you were hurting too. Just a different kind of hurt." James looked at him, overwhelmed. "I was, and I still am." Noah nodded, not saying anything else. But he didn't need to. That, James realized, was his son's way of saying he was ready to let him stay. Spring had come to Boston slowly, melting the last of winter's frost and replacing it with soft sunlight and budding leaves. James stood in the kitchen, sleeves rolled, flipping pancakes with surprising ease while Liam danced around to a playlist of 80s pop. It had become their Saturday tradition, one James cherished more than any luxury car or million-dollar deal. He glanced toward the living room where Noah sat, sketching in silence. The boy looked up and caught his gaze. They exchanged a brief nod. Not long ago, that moment wouldn't have happened. Not the eye contact, not the trust. James had spent his life chasing things: power, money, control. But this? This was the first time he'd ever truly earned something. Later that day, they visited Claire's grave. It wasn't an easy trip. James had asked the boys if they wanted to go, and to his surprise, both had said yes. Evelyn came with them, as did Olivia, who quietly held a small bouquet of yellow tulips, Claire's favorite. They stood in silence for a moment. Then Liam placed a drawing at the base of the headstone, Noah's latest sketch. It showed Claire sitting on a bench with the boys beside her, and James standing nearby, a little removed but still part of the picture. Noah said nothing, but the message was clear. James stepped forward and laid a single white rose on the grave. "I wish I could tell you everything," he said softly. "How sorry I am, how much I've changed, but maybe..." Maybe the boys are proof of that. He turned to look at them, standing close together. Liam clutched Noah's hand. Noah didn't pull away. "I'm going to be here," James said, his voice steady. "Always." No one spoke for a while, but the silence wasn't heavy. It was peaceful. Healing. That evening, after dropping the boys off at Evelyn's for the night, James and Olivia walked along the Charles River. The air was cool, but the sky glowed with the last light of day. "You really did it," Olivia said quietly. James looked at her. "Did what?" "Became a father. The kind Claire would have wanted you to be." James didn't respond right away. He thought of boardrooms, mergers, and all the ways he used to measure success. None of it meant what this did. "I used to think love was a distraction," he admitted. "That being vulnerable made you weak." Olivia stopped walking. "And now?" He met her gaze. "Now I think it's the only thing that ever really mattered." Her eyes softened. "So, what are you going to do with this second chance?" He reached for her hand. "Live it. All of it. The mess, the laughter, the pain. And maybe, if you'll let me, with someone who reminds me every day what's real." Olivia didn't say anything. She just smiled and leaned into him. And that was more than enough. Weeks later, James walked into the boardroom of Callahan Tech with a different kind of presence. Not the calculated arrogance of before, but the calm confidence of a man who finally understood what legacy truly meant. He had already informed the board he would be stepping down as CEO by year's end. Not retiring, just making space for the parts of life he had neglected for far too long. He didn't need to prove anything anymore. Not to shareholders, not to the world, not even to himself. His legacy wasn't in earnings reports. It was in 2 boys who now called him Dad, and a woman by his side who had taught him that even a broken heart could find its way back to love. One evening, James picked up the boys after school and suggested something spontaneous. "Pizza by the harbor?" he asked. Liam cheered. Noah raised an eyebrow but nodded. As they walked down the pier, the sunset bleeding into the water, Noah turned to him and asked, "Hey, Dad, can we go to Mom's favorite museum this weekend?" James froze, the word echoing in his chest. "Dad." He smiled slowly. "Yeah, we can do that." And just like that, James Callahan, former billionaire tycoon, guarded soul, and once lost father, knew he had finally found home.